Hi, I'm Kelly Chase and this is History Detective. And today I want to talk about some women who supported the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War, Hanoi Hannah and the Perfume River Squad. Now, before I get started, if you need a quick recap about the origins of the Vietnam War, here's a brief overview. The Cold War between the US and the USSR was in full swing, and the fear of the spread of communism was palpable. Vietnam had a long and oppressed history of being occupied and controlled by other countries including China, France, Japan, and then France again. Ho Chi Minh formed the Communist Party and began to lead an independence movement against the colonial oppression that Vietnam had been under for years. After World War II, Ho Chi Minh managed to fight off the French, and the country was divided into North and South Vietnam. The North were communist and the South were not, but the South were allied with the USA. Both the North and the South wanted a unified Vietnam, but they had opposing political ideologies. Now, because the North were communist, the United States were freaking out. They had this concept called the Domino Theory, where they believed that if one country fell to communism, then all of the surrounding countries would then be taken over, falling like dominoes. So the US decided to help South Vietnam by sending advisors and troops and bombs. This is where Australia gets on board. Prime Minister Menzies, obviously feeling Australia was a bit vulnerable after World War II, not to mention that he was staunchly anti-communist. He had, in fact, held a referendum to try and change the constitution and have the Communist Party banned. Well, Menzies thought that Australia needed all the friends that they could get and promised the US military advisors to help train the South Vietnamese soldiers. After Menzies retired, Prime Minister Harold Holt continued trying to be besties with the US, and by the end of 1966, he had sent 6,000 Australian troops to Vietnam, including the national servicemen who were conscripted. The Viet Cong, which is the common name for the North Vietnamese Communist Army, fought using guerrilla style. No uniforms, secret tunnels, booby traps, and only picking battles that they knew they would win. And part of these tactics was having women fight in the war. Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese communist leader, said women make up half of the population. If women are not liberated, then society is not free. And so women were invited to play a role in fighting for their nation. Not just invited, encouraged. And one of the methods to encourage women was propaganda. The Vietnam Courier, which is an English-language publication in Hanoi, the now capital of Vietnam, published statements such as, "A woman cannot be equal if she is shut out from social productive labour and restricted to private domestic labour." This Hanoi newspaper would go on to publish propaganda pictures and stories of the courageous feats of women who were fighting for their country. Speaking of Hanoi, one of the most famous Vietnamese women during the war was a radio personality who the American soldiers dubbed Hanoi Hannah, who worked for the North Vietnamese Defense Ministry's propaganda department. She is often described as silken-voiced, and her broadcasts would pose questions to the intelligent American GIs, such as, "Why have you come to Vietnam?" and "Do you miss your families and homes?" They are questioning why you are here. In America, there is no unity. There is violence. There are protests against you. These announcements would be interspersed with American music such as, "We gotta get out of this place," and the announcement of the US soldiers' deaths and their hometowns. Hanoi Hannah also gave news from both within Vietnam and the US, and she would also comment on the racial inequities that the African American soldiers experienced. In a 1992 television interview 17 years after the war was over, Hanoi Hannah spoke about her feelings towards the American soldiers in Vietnam. "I just wanted the GIs to resist this fighting. Of course, it is difficult for them because they are sent by the government, but our work is to make them believe that the war they are fighting is not just. It is against the Vietnamese people." Hanoi Hannah was a nickname given to her by the American soldiers, but she actually had another pseudonym, of which translated to Autumn Fragrance. Speaking of fragrance, now would be the perfect time to introduce you to some other Vietnamese women during the war, the Perfume River Squad. The Perfume River is the name of a river that runs through the city of Hue. It is named that because in autumn, when the flowers from the upriver orchards fall into the water, floral fragrance is carried down the river. However, due to industrialization, it apparently does not smell as aromatic as it once did. The Perfume River Squad were a top-secret, all-female combat unit whose job it was to deliver covert information to communist leaders. The squad was mostly made up of young women in their late teens and early 20s. By day, they were selling conical hats, and by night, they were funneling intel that helped launch the Tet Offensive. Working as street traders enabled the squad to secretly gather details about the movement of enemy troops. A former member explains why she joined the war effort. "I wanted to liberate myself, liberate my homeland, and liberate other women." When the Tet Offensive happened, their role shifted from underground information gathering to combat. They were called in to fight, and fight they did, hurling grenades, shooting AK-47s, and battling for their survival. A survivor explains, "We just kept shooting. If we didn't shoot, they would have shot us, so we just kept fighting." In this battle, 4 of the 11-member squad died. The Tet Offensive, the event for which the Perfume River Squad were gathering information, is named after the Lunar New Year holiday, Tet, which is when the North Vietnamese attacks occurred. It is said to be a major turning point in the war and the event that triggered the slow withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. The Tet Offensive was a surprise attack because Tet was a holiday, and for the North to plan an attack on their own holiday was completely unexpected. Tet is traditionally a time of feasting, family and friends, and there was meant to be a ceasefire, so a full-on offensive was a total sneak attack. Additionally, up until this point, most of the warfare had been guerrilla style, with tunnels, jungles, booby traps and secret trails. But Tet was a departure from this. Simultaneously, more than 30 cities were attacked, and one of those cities was Hue, where our Perfume River Squad was stationed, and a 3-week battle for control of the city ensued. This quote from a surviving member of the Perfume River Squad shows her loyalty to both the cause and her sister squad of spies. "My comrades died, and our anger mounted, as did our determination to fight to get revenge for our sisters." Many of the surviving Vietnamese women and their offspring suffered from the ill effects of Agent Orange, which was the chemical defoliant that the US used to eliminate the forest to give them an advantage over the jungle tactics being used. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and if you would like to hear an original song on this topic, there is a link to Shadow of a Shark up there, and in the description below you will find a link to my website where you'll find a list of references and links to teaching resources. This is Kelly Chase, on the case. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is being recorded today. I pay my respects to the elders and knowledge holders past, present and emerging.